Why do we like the things we like? From the stuff we're most proud of to our darkest secrets. What's the common thread that drives us to do all these things? Well, it turns out the answer isn't in some philosophy book or cultural study. It's deep, deep inside the wiring of our own brains. And what that wiring shows us is, honestly, it's both incredibly simple and kind of shocking. All right, let's get into it. So, picture this. You're in a tuk-tuk rattling through the streets of Bangkok. Your driver turns around and he's got this, entrepreneurial smile. And he just starts listing off a menu of human pleasures, one after another. Drugs, sex, gambling, this whole catalog of vice. Now, those things feel so different from each other, but they all manage to tap into the same fundamental human drive. The question is, what is it?
And here's where the whole puzzle gets really, really interesting. Because that same drive, it's not just about vice. I mean, what if I told you that the warm glow you get from donating to a charity has a deep biological connection to the insane euphoria of a heroin high? I know, it sounds totally impossible, but it's the key to understanding our own internal compass.
To solve this puzzle, we have to look past all the noise of culture and history. We need to find the source code, right? And it turns out, evolution has hardwired a very specific place in our brains where pretty much every powerful experience we have, good, bad, you name it, they all meet up. So let me introduce you to the medial forebrain pleasure circuit. And no, that's not a metaphor, it's not some abstract idea, it is a real, physical place in your head. It's this tiny, ancient network of neurons, and it's the common ground for everything we've been talking about. When you feel that rush of pleasure from anything, this is ground zero. This is where it's happening. So, how does it work? Well, think of a specific spot in there called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. The VTA is like the engine of the whole circuit. And when something good happens, that engine fires up and sends out a flood of this chemical you've definitely heard of, dopamine. Dopamine is basically the signal that goes out to the rest of your brain saying, hey, pay attention, this is good stuff, do this again.
Now here's where things get really wild. What happens when you just take away the middleman? You skip the food or the sex or the charity and you just push the pleasure button directly. Well, scientists back in the 1950s did exactly that. And what they found was, frankly, it was terrifying.
In these experiments that are now legendary, a couple of scientists, James Olds and Peter Milner, they put these tiny electrodes right into the pleasure circuits of rats. They set up this little lever, and whenever a rat pressed it, it got a tiny electrical jolt straight to that pleasure spot. And they realized almost immediately this wasn't just a reward, it was the ultimate reward. How ultimate are we talking? Some of these rats would press that lever up to 7,000 times an hour. Just let that number sink in. That is almost twice a second for hours. Pressing that lever became their entire existence. It completely took over everything. And this just shows you the raw, overwhelming power of this circuit. These rats would literally starve themselves to death with food right there. They'd ignore water, they'd ignore a potential mate, and maybe most shockingly, mother rats would abandon their own newborn pups, all for just one more chance to press that lever. Direct stimulation overrode the most basic instincts for survival. Of course, the immediate, kind of scary question is, okay, that's rats. What about us? Well, in a series of studies from the mid-20th century that are, let's just say, ethically horrifying by today's standards, we got our answer. Meet patient B19. As part of some misguided therapy, he was given a button that did the same thing. It stimulated the pleasure circuit in his brain. And just like the rats, he became completely obsessed. He would just mash that button over and over, to the point where doctors described him as being in a state of overwhelming euphoria. They had to physically unplug him from the machine, and even then, he fought them to get it back. The takeaway was undeniable. This raw, powerful system exists inside all of us. Now, such a powerful system is also a really vulnerable one. The dark side of all this pleasure is addiction. And we now understand addiction as a biological process. It's a hijacking of this very circuit, one that completely changes the experience of pleasure itself. Neuroscientists talk about addiction as a shift from liking something to wanting it. Liking is that initial good feeling, right? The euphoria, the high. But when you hit the circuit with that intense stimulation over and over again, the brain actually changes. Pleasure gets replaced by desire. Wanting isn't about feeling good anymore. It's this compulsive, desperate drive to stop feeling bad. The addict doesn't even like it that much anymore, but they want it desperately. And this isn't just a psychological thing, it is a physical change. Addiction literally rewires the brain. It builds and strengthens these superhighways that connect cues.
You know, a certain sight, a sound, a smell, to an intense, overwhelming craving. It's a type of learning that's so powerful it can last a lifetime, which is why relapse is such a constant battle.
So you can see how this creates this tragic downward spiral. It starts with intense pleasure, but pretty soon tolerance develops. You need more and more just to feel normal. Then comes dependence, where you feel absolutely terrible without it. And finally, those powerful cravings, triggered by all those rewired cues, lead to relapse, and the whole miserable cycle starts all over again.
So, we have this powerful circuit. It can be a source of incredible joy, but also profound suffering. But let's bring it back to our original puzzle. Is this circuit really just for food and sex and drugs, or, as we're about to see, is its reach way, way bigger than that?
This is the part that completely flips our whole understanding of pleasure on its head, because it turns out that this same system that gets hijacked by cocaine, the same system that drives compulsive gambling, it is not picky. It responds to a much, much wider range of human experiences than anyone ever thought.
And this slide says it all. I mean, just look at this. On the left, you've got this stuff we usually label as vices. On the right, things we call virtues. The absolutely shocking truth from brain imaging studies is that all of these things, from doing a line of cocaine to donating to charity, from the rush of a gambling win to the satisfaction of learning something new, they all light up the exact same medial forebrain pleasure circuit.
So what does this all mean? It means that deep down, our brains are basically amoral. They don't have one circuit for wholly virtuous pleasure and a totally different one for base sinful pleasure. There is only one system. Pleasure is our compass. Evolution hardwired it into us to guide us, whether that path leads to finishing a marathon or to the bottom of a bottle.
And that leaves us with a really profound question, doesn't it? If our own internal compass only points toward pleasure and it doesn't make a distinction between what our society calls constructive or destructive, then what does that mean for how we make our choices? It kind of suggests that the line we draw between virtue and vice might be a lot blurrier than we think, and that maybe it's drawn not by our biology, but by the stories we choose to tell ourselves about it.